A special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Coroners of Reddit, what is the strangest cause of death you've ever encountered? I did a summer internship at my state coroner's office as a way to pad my resume for medical school. There is one death that I will always remember, but not because it was especially disgusting. There was a male body brought in with 4 bullet holes in the anterior side, all of which were in the upper chest. Additionally, there were no exit holes on the posterior side and no evidence of bullet removal. However, after performing an autopsy for over an hour, the coroner could only find 2 bullets. After a lot more work, he ended up finding 1 bullet in the stomach and 1 in the small intestine. It turns out that these 2 bullets had actually punctured and entered the esophagus, and as he was dying his body swallowed and began to digest the 2 bullets. The coroner said he had actually seen this before, but that it was incredibly uncommon. That day I got a cool story and learned to never assume things at face value. Mortician here instead of coroner, but the weirdest case I had, without names, town, or anything being revealed, this person shot themselves with a 20-gauge shotgun to the head in their bedroom, lived through it, and managed to walk to the garage to reload a shell and finish the job. The way it went down, they shouldn't have made it past the first shell. We would have investigated it as a murder had the blood not shown a clear trail of what happened. It was a mess from the bedroom to the garage where the person had clearly shot themselves and walked in the garage to finish the job. Another case, when I went to pick up an elderly person in their home, the officer doing the house check found them standing at their kitchen sink dead from a heart attack. They died standing up and their skin was hanging from their arms holding on to the sink. It scared the officer shitless and he refused to re-enter the house LOL. Not a coroner but a cop at the time. September of 2015 I was on duty on my 3rd night working patrol after field training. This meant that I was patrolling in my own car without a training deputy with me. Being the new guy naturally I had the pleasure of working graveyard shift on weekends, Friday through Monday, 11 p. 7 a. Anyway, I was cruising one night and got a call for a signal 56, possible 10 to 7, accident with injuries, possibly fatal, and naturally I raced to the scene with lights and sirens. I got to the scene and discovered a motorcycle rider laying face down in a pool of blood. He was riding on a road that has a 5-mile straightaway and was testing out the top speed on his R6. He ended up hitting a large rock doing about 130 to 140 miles per hour and it threw him off his bike. He ended up cartwheeling end over end. He was wearing full gear and the helmet but the force of the impact knocked his helmet off and when his head hit the pavement again it ripped the top of his skull open and the force of the cartwheel severed his brain stem and his entire brain was found laying on the road. I'll never forget that sight. My aunt worked at a psych ward and when she got drunk she would tell us stories. This guy stabbed his eyeballs with pencils and started screaming that he was sick of seeing his dead daughter. He survives that but decides to stab some other sharp object, I forget what it was, in his ears because he didn't want to hear her either. Ends up dying by biting his tongue off and trying to swallow it and choking on his blood and tongue. Quite a sad story. Another one happened to a teen girl. I believe she had multiple personality disorder or whatever. Her other personality decided to choke her and punch her throat. Her throat bruised and closed up and she died. Last one was an old man who would see Elmo everywhere. Yes, the Red Sesame Street character. Elmo would tell him to eat his own shit. He ends up eating it and choking and dying. Freaking Elmo. An electrician who committed suicide by some homemade device rigged to a CRT TV, basically terminals rigged to a belt-type apparatus round his chest. Electrocuted instantly, but the current still flowed so there was a pronounced cooking effect with some disintegration, both on site and once the remains reached us. No info on how the body was recovered safely. The worst thing was that his granddaughter found him when she let herself in to see him for lunch unexpectedly. A disproportionate number of autoerotic misadventures. A friend of mine once did a summer internship at the city medical examiner's office and she had to deal with this particular case. So this lady is walking her dog down the sidewalk once upon a time. The dog manages to get loose from its leash and bolts into the street, right underneath a stopped garbage truck. The lady, trying to save her pupper, ducks under the truck. At that moment, the garbage truck driver, oblivious to the what's happening, backs up and over the poor woman's head. As my friend described it, there was nothing left above the shoulders. The dog was fine, though. Not a coroner, but I did recently come into my grandma's extensive genealogy of our C19 blood relatives in Texas. There were many weird stories, but this one seemed to stand out. I found another grave in Pitcoke Cemetery, Coryell County. That is interesting. There is only a metal marker, Lewis, girl/killed by Jack. Hers was the first grave in this cemetery. I remembered as a child Mama told me about this incident. Erna Mae Griffin told me the same story. They remember this child as being a niece of Laura Lewis and that she was always spoken of as baby. This was a very young child. She had wandered into the yard alone when the donkey attacked her. He would pick her up and toss her into the air, taking hunks of her body out with his teeth. When her mother was able to get to her, her body was scattered all over the yard. This depressed her mother so that the rest of her life was spent sitting by the window, grieving, and pulling her hair out. TLDR, donkey rips toddler apart. I'm never normally chime into these threads where they ask for someone in a specific profession, but I feel like sharing this one. My neighbor is a farmer. In the summer of 2002 he was out cutting the silage of the field behind our home. If you don't know, the way it goes is that one tractor cuts the field with the silage mower, which cuts the grass and leaves it in a compact trail of fresh cut grass. Then another tractor comes along with either a silage baler or a silage harvester and blower, which collects the grass trails, passes it through rotors to chop it up even more fine, and then blows it into another tractor-drawn trailer beside it. Children love watching tractors. I did it as a child. My neighbor's son did it as a child. On the day that my neighbor was harvesting the field, his 11-year-old son was watching with his friend, and suddenly decided to go play. Obviously we don't know what was going through his head, but he decided to hide on his friend, perhaps for a laugh, and hid under one of the cut grass piles. I don't know whether he simply lost track of time and didn't realize that the tractors were getting close to him, but he never emerged from the pile, and as a result, the harvester ran over him and cut him into pieces. His dad was driving the harvester. I can't imagine how he felt to get out to inspect what just jammed his machine and found the bloody scene of his only son mangled in the rotors of the harvester. Police were everywhere around the field that day. It was genuinely unnerving knowing that such a gruesome tragedy occurred so close to my home. Not a coroner, but in the emergency services. Went to a death once where the guy had suddenly dropped at the side of the road and his coworkers didn't know what had happened. He worked for a company cutting grass verges in our town and had a ride-on mower which was transported on the back of a trailer. The back of the trailer dropped down to form a ramp but was held under tension by a spring. It turned out the bolt holding the spring was rusted, and on this occasion the tension of the ramp coming down had sheared off the bolt head and fired it at him with huge force. From the sudden release, it hit him square on in the carotid artery. Didn't pierce the skin at all but ruptured it under the skin, causing him to die within seconds. Weirdest death I have ever been to. Poor guy was only in his 40s/50s and had kids and a wife who waved him off to work that day. I was glad I didn't have to go and give them the death message, wouldn't have known where to begin. If it had hit him anywhere else he would have had a big bruise and nothing more. There was a square inch or so of an area where it had the ability to be fatal and it got him. Final Destination type weirdness. Not a coroner, but this happened at a place I worked at previously. They were doing major renovations at the building I was working in, tearing out walls and creating a whole new space for some machinery we use. Part of the renovation/demolition was to knock several new doors/passageways in the old foundation to allow access from the new part to the old. Each of these doors was 15 feet across by 12 high. The foundation was 3 to 4 feet thick. They accomplished this by drilling holes along the lines where the doors would be, spaced closely together. Then, using hand tools, they would break the wall down by causing it to crack between the holes, then falling inward. One of the workers on this crew was behind a section of wall they were drilling the final holes, when, due to an unforeseen weakness in the foundation, that entire piece broke away and fell down on him in one piece, crushing him completely. The piece, from estimates, weighed close to 5 tons. I didn't see it, but people in the area say he was completely flattened, with every bone in his body pulverized. TL/DR, construction worker squished like a grape underneath a cinder block. A buddy's dad owns a crime scene cleanup business. The two worst were: a guy decides to kill himself, so he takes his 20-gauge shotgun to the garage, puts it in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Blows the side of his face all over the ceiling but is still alive and out of shells. He walks through the house up the stairs to his closet to get another round, the whole time he's spraying blood all over the place at a rate that it looked like it came from a fire hose. He gets to the closet and completes what he set out to do and sprays his brains all over the place. The other was a guy who decided to kill himself. He buys a brand new car that was $40,000 plus and takes a week-long road trip around the country. Ends up at his childhood home at a farm outside of Memphis, Tennessee. It's the middle of August and it's 100+ degrees. He hooks a hose up to his tailpipe and commits suicide. Nobody finds him for several days. By that time his corpse had literally exploded inside the car. The insurance company ran the numbers and decided it would be more cost-effective to pay my buddy's dad $10,000 plus to clean up the car than it would be to total it out. He said there was 6 inches of pink fluid throughout the car. Some poor soul is driving that thing today. I've posted this one before. My sister works as a histologist and has helped out for 1 or 2 autopsies. She told me a story of how when they were doing an autopsy on this guy, his bowels were extremely swollen, hard and stuck together. On further examination, he had swallowed a fish bone which pierced his stomach, into his intestines and skewered them together, leading to his death. Other stories she's told me about are a man and a woman who were driving along and got into a car accident at high speed. The husband was driving and wearing his seatbelt, while the wife was not. The husband's momentum against the seatbelt was enough to sever his upper body from the lower, killing him. The wife went through the windshield, skidded along the road for a bit and was mostly unharmed from the accident. An odd case of seatbelts not saving lives. Her boyfriend is now studying to be a pathologist. In my country they're the ones who carry out the autopsies, so I can ask him for weird autopsy stories if anyone is interested. Not a coroner, but I worked at a level 1 trauma center in the Oregon that covered half the state I'm from for a couple years, so I saw just about everything come through the operating table, including your everyday patients that didn't make it through surgery. Worst thing I've seen thus far is a man tried to take his life with a shotgun under the chin. Well, it didn't work, needless to say, and he spent something like 14 hours in the operating room having multiple reconstructive surgeries. The next was a woman who decided to take an entire bottle of Valium and cut her throat with one of those electric fish fillet knives. She also lived, but man was that a sight to see. But to say what takes the cake is we had a group of people in an illegal gaming den, and the story goes the guy lost all his money, left the gambling den, came back with an automatic rifle and lit the place up, killed 2 or 3 of the 6. They all came to the hospital and the ones that made it to surgery were missing body parts, and I got to see the X-rays and pictures of one, and basically the bullets collided with the bone in the leg, causing an explosion of metal and bone, making the exit wound, where the calf was, basically non-existent, just a mangled leg. Not a coroner, but I worked at a level 1 trauma center in the Oregon that covered half the state I'm from for a couple years, so I saw just about everything come through the operating table, including your everyday patients that didn't make it through surgery. Worst thing I've seen thus far is a man tried to take his life with a shotgun under the chin. Well, it didn't work, needless to say, and he spent something like 14 hours in the operating room having multiple reconstructive surgeries. The next was a woman who decided to take an entire bottle of Valium and cut her throat with one of those electric fish fillet knives. She also lived, but man was that a sight to see. But to say what takes the cake is we had a group of people in an illegal gaming den, and the story goes the guy lost all his money, left the gambling den, came back with an automatic rifle and lit the place up, killed 2 or 3 of the 6. They all came to the hospital, and the ones that made it to surgery were missing body parts, and I got to see the X-rays and pictures of one, and basically the bullets collided with the bone in the leg, causing an explosion of metal and bone, making the exit wound, where the calf was, basically non-existent, just a mangled leg. I've worked in various healthcare sectors throughout my adult life. Currently I'm working for an out-of-hours service when GP surgery are closed. I get a lot of calls to certify deaths during the nights and weekends. The strangest one we had was a 30-something-year-old man living in sheltered accommodation, usually adults who have severe disabilities and learning difficulties. This man was a regular at self-harming due to brain damage in his youth. The nurses looking after him were used to walking into his room and finding blood over the walls, etc., and calling an ambulance to take him to A&E. This night, however, we received a call to go out to certify his death. We attended and found that he had ripped out all of his fingernails and toenails completely, and then proceeded to slice the nails beds repeatedly with a razor. He died of severe blood loss quite slowly. I've seen a lot of suicides and unfortunately an awful lot of deaths, but this one really made my toes curl. To put yourself through that, to me, is unimaginable. My first job was being a mortician's assistant. This was because my house was 2 blocks from the graveyard of my town and I was always playing in it. The weirdest cause of death I had seen in the practice was by far this old lady. When we had gotten the call to pick her body up, straight from the arrival, the house smelled like cat urine, nothing over the top. This is actually a normal smell. The oddity was, when we had found her body, the cats were going to town tearing the body apart. Later that day we had found out she had attempted to eaten one of her cat's kittens whole and choked to death. For several years my dad was a coroner for a podunk little county in the middle of nowhere. Occasionally he'd have to take me or my little sister on calls. We walked to his office after school and then he'd drive us home. Sometimes a call would come in before he could get us home. My sister and I would sit in the car while Dad did his thing. We never could see anything of the body, as Dad was careful to park far enough away that we couldn't, and we knew better than to get out to get a better look, as Dad could give a spanking that would make you cry before he even started. So we would watch from the car as lots of uniforms milled around, and if we were lucky we'd get to see the vague, covered form of the body as it was rolled toward a waiting emergency vehicle, and then Dad would give us details once he got back to the car to take us home. The saddest one we were there for was the 2-year-old corpse they pulled out of the river. He was an adult, he'd just been in the river that long. Some poor schmuck had been stuck under something at the bottom of the river bed for 2 whole years, and had only surfaced because enough of him had rotted away. He was missing limbs, he was so badly decomposed, that what was left of him was finally jogged loose by the current. They identified him weeks later. They had dental records. No one had even filed a missing persons for him. I was very sorry for that man. I have other stories of my father's coroner experiences, if anyone's interested. Bagels and brains, people soup, and the train tracks drunkard are all family favorites.